everyone who's trickling in. We're going to give it a couple seconds before we start our panel discussion, PhDs, Place and Preservation. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for attending PhDs, Place and Preservation, a panel discussion, and just for attending Dismantle Preservation, this year's unconference in general. The goal for the event is to elevate historically excluded narratives and also to amplify voices of people who are challenging the way the preservation movement and the public history field operate today for the benefit of all of us moving into the future. It's a free event thanks to the support of Alpha Wood Foundation, Eileen and Norman Tyler, and Museum Hack as well this year. It's a free event, but you are being encouraged, if you feel so inclined, to donate to a charity of your choice or one of the pre-selected charities. We're encouraging donation to Latinos and Heritage Conservation, Asian and Pacific Islanders and Historic Preservation, House of Tulip, the Decay Devils, and also the Apache Passion Project, which is a fundraiser specifically to create skateboard parks in Navajo Nation. So I hope you all enjoy the conversation today. It'll be moderated by Anna Gasha, and I'm gonna vanish until the end. Feel free to throw your thoughts, comments, questions in the chat, or also utilize the Q&A feature.
Cool, thanks, Sarah. My name is Anna Gasha. I'll be moderating today's conversation. Very privileged to be doing so. Just to quickly introduce myself before we go around and introduce all of ourselves. I am a rising third-year PhD student at Columbia's Historic Preservation Program, Columbia University, New York. I'm really excited to be sharing or hearing about all these other folks' experiences pursuing a PhD, and really looking forward to it. So just a quick rundown on how I think this conversation is going to go. We're going to focus on the first half about kind of navigating the processes and experiences leading up to and during the PhD. I think there's kind of both people who are interested in pursuing a PhD as well as people who are kind of curious about, like, why do these people do it? So I think we want to kind of cater to both those audiences. So the first part is kind of talking about the experience. Then we'll also kind of go into how everyone here is also, in addition to being a scholar, an amazing activist and kind of putting their work into the public for the benefit of everyone else. So I want to kind of talk about how the PhD and working within this institution of higher education and academia actually fits into their activism work. So we're going to have kind of those two parts of the conversation. And sorry, I've talked too long now already. I want to go around and let's introduce ourselves, and kind of as a segue into the conversation, you know, in addition to a brief rundown of who you are, why did you decide to pursue a PhD? And, you know, if you're talking about your previous experiences, how did those experiences, you know, academic and non-academic, kind of fit into inform your decision to go get a PhD? So I'm just going to go alphabetically, and so we'll start with Kai.
Great, thanks so much. So my name is Kai Barius. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a rising second year PhD student at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. And to just dive into, I guess, why I decided, since I'm one of the younger PhDs, I think, in this conversation, for me, I was working after my undergraduate years in the Bay Area, and I came into contact with a lot of Filipino-American scholars and the work that they did in preserving Little Manila and Stockton, and I was really inspired by that. So that was sort of the catalyst for me going into graduate school. I wanted to contribute to that conversation, and yeah.
I think Laura's next.
Yeah. Great, thank you. My name is Laura Dominguez. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a rising fifth year PhD candidate in history at the University of Southern California. and on the board for Latinos and Heritage Conservation, which I think my involvement with LHC is really one of the reasons why I went back to get a PhD. I was mentored by a really wonderful group of scholar activists and advocates who were able to kind of bridge the connections between their academic careers and their public-facing careers and help sort of expose the need for scholars or people trained in the humanities for doing kind of advocacy related and education work in the field. So I got a master's in historic preservation, and then I worked for 2 nonprofits in advocacy and education in California in between the master's and the PhD. And it really was, I think, my exposure as an on-the-ground advocate for historic places to the kinds of structural inequities that prevent certain groups from having their histories recognized and preserved, and starting to ask these really big kind of foundational questions about whose history is acknowledged, whose history is erased. It just sort of led me back into school, realizing that in addition to really loving the research and writing aspects of my job, that I just had these questions that I wasn't getting answered, and I really wanted an opportunity to dig into them in a much more meaningful way. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, we'll definitely kind of come back to the idea of mentorship and kind of being connected to the outside world beyond school. Okay, Miranda.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is, I'm Dr. Miranda Roberts. I am currently on Kumeyaay and Luiseño and Cahuilla territory in Southern California. I am an enrolled member of the Yerington Paiute tribe, and I'm also Chicana. And I got my undergrad degree in history from San Bernardino, Cal State San Bernardino, and my master's in public history from University of California, Riverside, and my doctorate from UCR. And the reason it kind of all unfolded into my lap, but the reason I came into preservation was because I felt a sense of loss due to a lot of the intergenerational trauma my family and the people I knew around me experienced, and realizing how much erasure from the dominant cultural historical narrative has resulted in that sort of trauma and that sort of it manifests in those different ways. So I wanted to help try to fix the things and do the work that it took to make sure that our voices were being prioritized. And I think that's what I'm trying to do at the Field Museum of Natural History and now at the Museum of Us, but we'll see.
Go ahead, Skylar.
Hello, my name is Skylar Carter. I'm a 3rd year at Texas A&M University in the Urban and Regional Science program. I'm a native of Oklahoma, so that's why you see Oklahoma history. I am a very passionate about sharing the history of Oklahoma, and what inspired me to pursue my PhD really was during my master's studies at Alabama A&M University, just being with my peers, and there was so many of us talking and having this conversation about going to that next level. And similar to Laura, I had these questions and things that I wanted to explore in regard to how African Americans were and are portrayed in history books, in urban planning, and all these different fields that were dominated by white or white male spaces. And so I am just really, really excited to have this opportunity to explore this topic and talk with you all today. So, yes.
Great. So I guess kind of thinking along the lines of, we've talked about how you reached the decision to go into this program. I guess in then moving to applying, I want to kind of, put out the fact that we're in very different departments across this group of us. I guess broadly speaking, how did you kind of decide where you wanted to apply, what kind of department you wanted to be located in? And, after everything was said and done, like, how did you select your program? Can you walk us through kind of the thought process behind that? Anyone can jump in and start us off.
Well, I can start, I guess.
Yeah, go ahead.
I still have my mic on. So I'll start with wanting to continue again on that exploration. And I went to a school up north, very cold, and I said I wanted to come back. I wanted to come back down south and be in better weather atmosphere. And so that was a big thing when I was applying. You know, what was the climate like? What was the climate like? But also my mentor, Dr. Miranda Roberts, she was a very pivotal piece in why I applied to Texas A&M. I applied to a couple of different universities, but it was really something that was pulling me to want to work with her. I had really a desire to work with her because of what she was doing. And it matched so well with what I was already doing in Oklahoma with my research. And so really just seeing her and her journey as she developed and grew with her position here and the opportunities and resources, it showed me that it was possible. So that mentorship is very, very important to my journey, as I'm sure with many of you guys. So I'll let you guys jump in.
For me, I had my mentor and my advisor at Cal State San Bernardino was the one who encouraged me to apply to UC Riverside. He had felt that he had gained a lot of success in being both a academic teacher, like a professor, as well as also doing collaboration for exhibitions on the side. And he felt that that would also be kind of my path, because I don't ever want to be a tenured professor. I'm sorry. And everything is fine. A tenured professor, I did not want to do that because the quality of life is horrible, at least for how I understand it to be. And he had his advisor at UC Riverside. And so he put me in contact with him, and he had the same idea of, I think that it would be beneficial if you learn to teach, but also to learn about how to work in museum spaces and public history. And UC Riverside has a really good public history program. It's not very well known yet, but there's a lot of great people coming out of that.
I can pick up on that thread, because for me it was, faculty mentors, geography, and funding that were the kind of three biggest factors leading me to USC. And I had done my master's at USC, so I felt like I already had roots there. I knew that my dissertation topic would deal with LA history or Southern California history more broadly, so it made sense for me to be there. And I didn't really want to uproot my life at that point, since I was a little bit older when I went back to school. But I had a chance to take classes in the history department while I was getting my master's. So I already had some people identified who I knew I could work well with, who I felt, and who I think, even though my program is a traditional history program, not a public history program, there were enough people situated there who were open to exploring those kinds of alternatives. And there isn't so much a kind of pipeline pushing us towards tenure track positions that I felt like there would be room enough for me to explore. And then funding, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more, but it was important. I was fortunate that we were able to balance more on the fellowship side, as opposed to having to rely so heavily on TA-ships. So there was more room for us to focus on our research. And that was a huge, huge piece for me as well.
And just to echo, those three factors are sort of the ones that inform my decision as well. I'm not necessarily a fan of the cold weather, but I did do my undergrad in New York. And so most of my social circle, I have family and friends in the area that sort of pulled me back to the Northeast. And I actually specifically looked for a mentor and advisor that knew Philippine history. I think it's just something I wanted because that was part of my motivation to go to grad school, is that I didn't feel like there were enough historians working in this part of the world. And so that was really important in my decision. Funding was also important. And sort of as an aside, I wasn't exactly expecting to get into a PhD program. I'm in an MA to PhD sort of track, and weighing different MA programs versus a funded PhD program was also huge in my decision making. So to be able to get both of those degrees out of the way is probably the number one reason I ended up at UMass as well.
Yeah, definitely kind of want to pick up on the thread of mentorship and all the kind of resources that are necessary later on. But just kind of before we stray from the kind of beginning stages of the PhD program, I just kind of wanted to see if anyone had anything to say about sounds like folks knew kind of generally what direction they wanted to go in or what they wanted to focus their research on. And that came along with the idea of who they would want to work with as their advisor or mentor. But I guess one question that I get a lot when people approach me to talk about PhDs or doing a PhD potentially is, is it okay to not have a clear sense of what you want to do? Like, have your ideas about what you wanted to research or focus on changed over time at all? Or what's kind of the expectation that you think exists for people coming into these degrees?
I can jump in. I think definitely taking the pressure, if you're considering a PhD, take the pressure off of yourself and do not think that you have to have everything laid out when you, the first week of school, the first semester. I had a general idea of what I was studying or the topic surrounding Black towns and Black freedom colonies and Black settlements. But my, my research has shifted and kind of transformed and evolved as I've gone on, but still in the same lane, but definitely the focus has changed to more of an academic sense and civic engagement and how that intersection of urban planning. So starting from curation and museum curation to adding some other pieces to it. So you can have that foundation and you can have an idea, I think, but don't put that pressure on yourself to have everything figured out, because it is a journey. And there's going to be opportunities presented to you all throughout your program. So you want to just kind of be able to evaluate those and consider those with a clear head and yeah, be able to take advantage of those.
I'll definitely add to that and say that is, yes, don't feel like you have to figure it all out the first, even the first year. I would say though, the foundation, you should know what you're going into for grad school, and especially a PhD, with an idea of what kind of work you're doing, what kind of history or whatever the subject is, what you want to be adding to it, who maybe already be doing this work that you can learn from and expand on. Things I wish I would have done differently is do my own homework on the scholars already doing the work that I've been lucky enough to join in on, but because that would have helped me better shape, how I wanted to approach my dissertation. But I also think that it's important to dream, but once you're in the program and you have you'll learn all about these words, but the exams, and I had a prospectus and a defense, you really are getting tied into a specific thing. Once you have the topic at hand, and if your advisor is good, hopefully they will be, that they will help you understand the bigger picture of your dissertation and help you structure it and actually how to write it and all of those things. But as you get closer to exams and as you get closer into finishing the program, or at least writing the dissertation, it gets a lot harder to have flexibility on what you want to do, because your grad school, wherever it is, will have a set deadline over over when they want you out, when you're no longer actively fundable. And I mean that, you're not doing anything, you're not writing anything, you're not producing things. And the school sees it as an investment. They see you as an investment, and they give it and they take it away very quickly. So I think that having a structure and then realizing, okay, this is it, and you're stuck with that subject sometimes for a long time, and it sucks. And something you want to shift your focus, but it's important to stay understanding that once the dissertation's done, then you can actually do all of the work that you want to do. The dissertation is just the way to get you there. Is just another stepping stone.
I just want to jump back onto that point, Miranda, because I'll just a moment of transparency, because I definitely in the last year, so my second year, kind of went through that process of coming to grips with what my research was going to be, and really understanding that this is the first big project that I'm going to do. I have my whole career to do my passion projects. So when you really settle with that and you come to peace with that, things get easier. The weights begin to lift off, and you can the weight is off of your mind as well. So you can be creative and you can really start making those connections in your research, which is a really beautiful thing. And you just get inspired to do to more things and more research. So definitely just allow yourself to feel all the feels and just take the journey and find your place.
And just to add quickly to that, because I think I came into it feeling like I was already behind before I even started, that I didn't have I didn't have my dissertation topic narrowed down my first week. And I remember one of my advisors saying, it's not about having a project defined, it's about deciding, kind of as Miranda was saying, it's about knowing what conversations you want to be a part of. And it felt for me, coming from the workforce, going back into a PhD program, like such a luxury, like I wasn't doing enough work because I was just reading. And I felt like I was already like that. It felt like such a luxury to be able to read. But I think that there are these benchmarks that are carved out in the program, and those first couple of years where you're allowed to just read and explore and kind of understand what sparks your curiosity and what questions are raising. I really appreciate that in hindsight. I think it made me really anxious that I didn't have it defined during that period of time. But looking back, I think there is a lot of wiggle room. So if you don't have a project necessarily defined at the beginning, like that's the most enriching time, is to be able to take classes in lots of different fields, maybe with faculty you didn't think you would want to work with, but who end up surprising you or being able to help mentor you in other ways. So I think it's there's a lot of pressure, and it doesn't all need to be right at the beginning.
Yeah, and one thing I'd add, so as somebody that's very early in this process, I also will be very transparent and say I don't think I have my dissertation topic narrowed down, but I am sort of surrounded by people that have encouraged me to experiment, take classes outside of the history department. And one thing that I've found that has sort of helped me grow as a scholar is to see the seminars and to see the courses as chances to try on different hats, so different tones of voice, different methods of research, different questions that I ask. And I think that that's actually kind of pulling me closer towards that dissertation topic. But even going into my second year, I can't tell you that I have it like very nailed down.
Yep, I will underscore that myself and say that, I'm starting to narrow things down, but I definitely don't have a specific thing yet. So I feel like that's pretty normal. But maybe that's just me.
No, I think it's a lot more people, because I talk with more folks who are in, programs all over the country. Like they are saying, in the same space, they're saying the same thing. We think that we're the only ones going through it, but there's so many of us that are experiencing these things, and it's just a process and a phase in the journey.
Yeah, it's a marathon. And, just to kind of give a little more context, I see there's a question from YouTube about, just to clarify how many years everyone's program is, minus the master's component, if that is included. So just quickly, our expectation is that we'll be done and out in 5 years, but we do have funding until our 7th year. So there's no set timeline, but kind of the anticipation is for 5. So I don't know if folks just want to chime in real quick.
We're funded at USC for 5 years, but most people take 6 or 7, and there's additional fellowships that can come in. Right now, I say that with the caveat that we've all just lost a year from the pandemic in doing our research. So for those of us who are at the dissertation stage, we're all anticipating it'll be an additional year beyond what we originally budgeted.
Our curriculum is set up for a 4-year program. Most start out with 3 years of funding, and then always opportunities that come for additional funding to complete that 4 or 5 years. But usually 4 to 5 years is the completion time here.
For me, I remember my master's was a part of it. So I believe, and it depends. I have friends who are still there. So I believe they start to get anxious more towards like the 7th year. Like if you have been in for like a very long period of time, like so beyond 5 years in just the PhD program, the school gets to get nervous. And I say that, but also I wish that they would stop making it seem like it's the end of the world if someone isn't done by like their 10th year, because life happens. But you know, I think for me altogether, I did my master's and my PhD 6 years, but I don't recommend that because I got really sick. So I think for us, it was like 7 overall.
Well, sorry, Kai, you wanted to?
Yeah, without the master's component, it's a 4-year, they offer 4 years of department funding. And then I think people do take about 6-7 years to actually complete it without the master's extra year of coursework. So they're just encouraged to find outside funding or teach within the university.
Cool. So I guess kind of we brought back in the funding as a really fundamental resource question indirectly through kind of talking about how long it takes and how that's tied to how the university is able to pay us. And just kind of expanding on that, I think we've started to already touch upon this, but what resources have been necessary or important to you in getting through the PhD? You know, this kind of ties also to what Miranda was just saying about how taxing the experience can be overall, and how much it drains us emotionally and physically. So both in terms of, you know, that experience in terms of both the challenge and, you know, what parts of it keep you going. What resources and other factors have been really kind of fundamental to make you successful or feel like you can, you know, keep going on what you wanted to do. This could be, you know, we talked about finances already, advisors and mentors, whether that's in the institution or outside, cohorts or other peers, anything that you can think of, if you want to kind of speak to that.
I will say, and it kind of goes into the mentors as well. Your mentor should be your biggest advocate and help in finding resources in some ways. They should be the ones who are helping you network with different departments, but also with different people and different organizations who could potentially help you with your funding. For me, my advisor was my biggest advocate and the biggest person for us on the department level. And so his name is Dr. Cliff Trabzer, making sure that his students had funding, actually being involved in the process of what funding was available and what the school was going to be provided, and then helping us find other things. And that is rare, unfortunately, from what I've seen from other people who I've been lucky enough to go to school with, that's not always the case. But if your mentor is good and able to, you know, have that ability to connect you with multiple different groups and multiple different people and sources, then that goes a long way. And I think that should also be the department. I feel like the department should also be actively helping students find more resources rather than just maybe a flyer here or there. They should be actually helping their students apply for more funding and things like that.
For me, what was really helpful, of course, your cohort relationships, really building that bond with those who are in your cohort, because you guys are going through that process together. So it really helps to have somebody to commiserate with and celebrate with and all of that. But also organizations on campus, organizations, graduate organizations. We have one here, the Black Graduate Students Association here on the campus at Texas A&M, and it's PhDs and master's students from all disciplines, all departments. And so having that, you know, just melting pot of folks who are, again, going through that same process, but in a different department, because everybody's, you know, requirements and curriculum obviously is different, but having those folks to support you, and also being on a PWI campus and having a group of people of color and Black PhD students together doing it and talking about the process is really a special special moments of support throughout this process. So definitely, I would, if you have time, and it could be email, in person meetings and things like that, but if you have that connection on your campus, I would encourage you to take advantage of that, because they can really help.
So sort of like similarly to that, one of the strengths of this area that I'm in is that there is sort of this Asian American community within the 5 colleges. And so that's, I think, a really important resource for me meeting other graduate students in different departments at UMass working in Asian American studies, as well as other professors in different colleges that could be mentors or could be advisors or outside members of my committee in the future. So I think that that particular group has helped a lot for me.
My experience has been very similar to what others have described in that, you know, I think I've had a mentor and an advisor who has been really intentional about creating community among his students. So that's also, it's not just me kind of feeling support from my cohort, but from other people who are at different stages, sort of this cross-generational mentoring that's happening among students has been really invaluable. And, you know, joining student organizations like I'm in on a listserv or like a group chat with a Latina PhD group. And it's really nice to just have that space as well. That's kind of unofficial, but also unofficial. And I would just say, you know, these like, it really is my peers, I think, who've helped me kind of, you know, keep my mental health in check, not, you know, help me combat the burnout, help me kind of combat the imposter syndrome, because all of these things are really real. And I think we're fortunate, at least in our situation, where we're not competing against each other for funding, because I think that that can be a huge barrier in terms of building relationships with your peers if you're constantly sort of pitted against one another. And I really credit our department and our advisors with sort of taking that competition out of the equation for us, so that we're able to kind of create that network of support for ourselves.
Any other kind of categories of resources or support networks that you can think of?
I think for me, and my biggest advice is to not stick within your own university. I think that one, and we talked about this in our pre-meeting, is that you have to be, as an introvert, you have to be okay with meeting new people and actually putting yourself out there a little bit, reaching out to the scholars who are writing your favorite books or doing the things that you are in love with, because to me, that is going to be the thing that helps you find the right person who can give you funding, or the right organization that will help give you funding. Networking, even as a grad student, how to do it better, but my grad school was not very good at teaching us how to network, but you know, is a big part of doing this work in a good way and helping you to do it and beyond just what the school has. And that just I think Zoom and what we've all went through kind of made this easier, because now people are much more approachable on the internet, and it's easy, it feels easier kind of to negotiate or have communication. But I would say getting out of your comfort zone little by little by just staying in, don't just stay in your little group. It's important to go and build connections across the discipline as a whole.
And make those interdisciplinary connections. I think that's really, that was falling into as well, because I was picking up on that, because I'm seeing so many you know, connections between urban planning and communications, and working with all kinds of people in the anthropology department, and just like, you know, to piggyback on what Miranda was saying, don't you know, really stay in your department, because there's so many connections that can be made, and so many ideas that you don't know what anybody else is thinking, right? So there's ideas out there that you can help and put your little spin on, and some great collaborations can come from it.
And kind of even going out a little farther, any kind of, does anyone want to speak to kind of networking or making connections outside the university, and how that has informed your academic pursuits or efforts? And I know, as folks who are really kind of interested in hitting the real world and, you know, the actual ground out there, I'm wondering if that's kind of been facilitated by being in a school, or if that's kind of been harder to do.
I will say that the biggest slap I've ever received from coming out of grad school into work was everything that my grad school experience was teaching me about decolonization work, about theory, about how to write properly, all didn't make a difference once I was actively engaging in decolonization practices, or working with people who didn't know what that term even meant. And so I think it's important as academics or scholars, or however you want to word that, to be aware that our world is very small in the way that our terminology exists, in the way that we have experienced things. Once you go out into the world that is maybe beyond academia, it's a kind of unveiling for yourself, because you're like, oh, people are not maybe thinking of the way these things are, or they're not seeing it this way. And you have to actively engage in a re-education for not only yourself, but for them, because you have now, as a PhD, it's my responsibility to help educate people, even if I'm not teaching in a school or college, right? It's important to help use my skills in everyday life as much as I can within respectable boundaries, right? So for me, I think that it's always been about just keeping all of those things in mind and realizing that as great as school has been on, I can understand Foucauldian theories and all of those great things, is once I'm trying to convince someone or talk to them about how museums uphold white supremacy, it completely goes out the door, because they're not on the same, we're not thinking the same. And that's unfortunate, because these types of critical thinking skills should be accessible to everybody, not just to meet certain criteria levels.
And I just want to, so as far as the archives, and that's when you say that, Miranda, about connecting with the non-academic sector, right? With the work that I do with grassroots archives, really bridging these non-traditional archival spaces and leveraging that to have those traditional spaces recognize that this history is worth knowing. It means a lot to these communities, to these people, and that respect should be there. And so, yeah, learning how to communicate what we've learned on this, this high level stuff that we talk about on a daily, bringing that to layman's terms is definitely definitely a necessity in this space that we are in. I'm sure we're all kind of feeling that, but I did want to touch on Facebook PhD groups, because those have been very, very helpful. And you connect with so many people all over the country that, again, are going through the same thing, and they're able to, provide that support and that advice to keep going. Because definitely in those times where you're like, what am I doing? And, you just scroll a little bit and you talk to a few people, and yeah, you'll be surprised at the connections that you make. And there, it's not just, that superficial, like you really can make some really, really great connections through those avenues as well. So I wanted to encourage those to check those out as well.
And I've also, to kind of complement that, stayed, kind of continued to try to nurture relationships with colleagues in the preservation world that, I had developed prior to going to grad school, because I think those relationships, not only does it help me feel like I'm keeping those skills active and I'm staying part of that conversation while I'm in my academic bubble most of the time, but I think it also helps me stay connected to the why of a PhD. Why did I decide to do this? And I think that also is a very kind of grounding force in my life as I'm trying to navigate this. So I think, and that kind of speaks a little bit to one of the questions in the Q&A, that I think it's just been important for me to have some kind of public history or preservation project active the whole time. And of course that's time away from my research, which I'm not technically supposed to be doing, but it is helping me sort of, again, stay grounded.
And I think maybe I think we've started talking already about kind of the work that you're doing outside the PhD proper, and maybe some of that can be framed as activism work, kind of related to or kind of in parallel with your academic work. And I want to kind of start that off with the question of how has pursuing a PhD kind of shaped or influenced your efforts at activism? And kind of in a more pointed way, like, do you think that the institutional framework of academia or a university has supported or interfered with those efforts? And the answer could be both, but how is that kind of navigating that kind of space and its rules and bureaucracy been like as an activist?
I guess I'll go again. I'm sorry. Feel free to jump in, anybody. I didn't intend to be an activist. I think when I started the PhD, I was coming right out of undergrad into my PhD program with the master's built in. And so it was kind of just like, oh, let's see what happens. But what ends up happening is when you work in a space like I have, if it's not academic, but also this applies to academia, because museums and academia as a whole have been on the rise together since time immemorial, it feels like. So how these spaces of education are so actively hurting Indigenous people, being a part of witnessing that, because as great as it is to be a person with a PhD, and the fact is I get access now into rooms that may not be accessible to everyone, which is not fair or good, but you're also realizing, you're going through a realization that there isn't a lot of people who look like me or who have the same culture as me on this level. And so having to be that my own kind of activist was what kind of was given to me. I felt like that was my responsibility as an Indigenous person, was like, okay, this is not okay. There's no more Indigenous people here in general. So how do I make space? How do I start to use my position of privilege? Because as a person who has academic background, I am privileged in that way. And to make space for not just more of us, but also the people on the ground who are doing the work on a more day-to-day basis. And so for me, the activism was a process into the work that I was finding myself in, because I was still being treated with disrespect as an Indigenous person, and working in a museum that had already disrespected my ancestors for centuries or generations was proving to me to be unacceptable on every level. And then seeing how it was also affecting other communities was making my decision much more easier to be like, I don't need this job. I'd rather be leaving good work and trying to make things better than worrying about a job. That's just me, though. There's different approaches anyone can take. And that no chance was I ever, I was supported by people, but the institution and academia and universities as a whole are like, why are you doing those things? You're going to ruin your career. You're going to ruin the prospects of it, because you shouldn't be saying this and you shouldn't be saying that. You should be writing like this and producing 5 journal articles a year. And realizing that like, that's not what I'm here to do, but also like, why can't you support me realizing that these issues are still existing? Or why don't you help me fix these issues rather than making me fold into the norm? Why aren't we working actively to change with one another? So it kind of was just something that was thrown at me, but that I felt like if I didn't keep doing, I wouldn't be doing justice to my people.
Yeah, I think I just started to think of myself as an activist, even though I've been doing this work for 10 years already. But as I started to really get into my oral history and doing oral history interviews with my community members, my elders from my hometown, and also working with the Texas Freedom Colonies Project, hearing like the stories of destruction, or the stories that really will break your heart, with these communities that are no longer in existence or really struggling to survive. Hearing those stories really, really motivates me to honor, my ancestors, honor my community in using my skills, using my resources. And so I think that piece is really what has influenced my research, has really been influenced by that, and trying to be that voice, and as Miranda said, creating that space to honor this and respect and learn and educate the public on these amazing stories of development and these settlements coming from nothing. It is just amazing what our people were able to do, and what folks were able to do with nothing. So yeah.
I can add, sort of similar life experience. And I mean, there are practical skills that I've gained from the PhD program that are directly applicable to being a more kind of effective advocate. So, just being able to ask more precise questions or better questions, or, being able to write more effective arguments. And I think in my case, in doing history, one of the things I'm most grateful for is this sort of shift in perspective where I'm able to kind of situate the issues and topics that, I'm sort of motivated to try to, be part of a change for in the field. I can put those in a larger historical context and understand how the kind of inequities in the preservation field are tied to other forms of social injustice and other forms of social movement. And so I think being able to see that larger picture has overall made me a better advocate. But I was trained as an advocate. So, I had to kind of put that reorient this kind of professional framework that I had and sort of think about it a little bit differently. But I think, and one of the things I've really struggled with and constantly challenging myself to kind of rethink is, what it means to be an advocate for people who, as Miranda was saying, don't have the privilege of being in academia, that, understanding the power that comes from that. Because I think one of the things that motivated me to go back to grad school was constantly being in front of landmark commissions and hearing commissioners say things like, well, no scholar has written about your history, or, there's no academic literature about this place, and so therefore it must not be significant. And, wanting to be part of a solution that helps amplify community knowledge and community voice without speaking for, I don't want to be the academic who comes in and says, well, I wrote the book on this topic, and so now I can't, now we have the evidence that we need. So it's that tension constantly between, how do I continue to work with community as opposed to trying to be a spokesperson on behalf of. And so, I feel like that's a constant, area that I'm trying to kind of grow in. But it's been really, I think, important. And I think, like Miranda has said, there isn't a lot of institutional support. There are people who support this, but not institutionally. And I think, we see a lot of labor inequity in terms of who does kind of publicly engaged work. It's women and femmes of color who are doing this work, who are taking time away from their own research and who aren't producing, the peer-reviewed journal articles at the same rate, or, the other kinds of projects that matter more when you're going up for fellowships or tenure, things like that. And I think that that's one of the reasons why I think, like a lot of others, I'm hesitant to want to kind of continue being in that world.
So I really like the way that you said, like, precision, Laura, and then how you ask questions. So that for me is also how I feel like maybe not my activism, but my politics or my understanding of these things that frustrate me has been shaped by studying race and empire. So I can, sort of refine my questions, but also I have this vocabulary for what I'm feeling and experiencing. And I can also reflect on which practices would really address the issues that I find or care about, and as well as those that work for me. So I'm finding that teaching or working one-on-one with people is something that I'm really comfortable with and that I feel like I can be effective in. But this is sort of, also related to a question that I saw. I really appreciate that my department offers sort of like career preparation outside of academia. And that's sort of together with me understanding the history of race and empire in America and Filipino American history, also understanding the different avenues that I can take outside of academia to address inequalities in the museum world or in nonprofits or, sort of what have you. So those two things together, I think, are how I'm developing my quote unquote activism within the institution, but not necessarily because of the institution.
And unless someone has something else to add in the vein of this question, I think you just provided a perfect segue into talking about what you're kind of envisioning your plans are for after the PhD, or in the case of Miranda, what did you want to do after the PhD and how has that changed or not? And specifically, what career options exist beyond academia? I think what we're kind of hinting at is that there is a lot that is problematic about academia, and that's not necessarily the choice that everyone's going to make in terms of what their future is going to look like beyond the doctoral degree. So what are you thinking about? What are your plans, ideas, hopes? What do you think the PhD kind of does in opening doors for people who are interested in preservation or public history? Like, why go get a PhD to begin with?
I think for me, after I get done, definitely want to educate in some way. I don't know if that's going to be tenure track or not at this moment, but I do want to provide a resource, and I want to be a resource for other women of color, other students of color coming up in the urban planning field, to see that you don't have to be this expert before you go and do this. And you can also, you can engage at all different levels when you're doing this type of work. And preservation is not just for those who have been doing it for 20 years. And, you know, it's not that there's opportunities at different levels. And I think that my job right now is to present those opportunities and to just let people know that there are possibilities for folks to get involved in any way that they would like. So, you know, in the future, documentaries or whatever, I do want to, you know, do more things with media and engaging with youth and getting them involved. So that's the future for right now, but teaching in some way and making movies.
I mean, the idea of kind of showing that there is so many kind of different layers and entryways for opportunities is also kind of what this whole unconference is about, right? Like, we're focusing on emerging professionals and recent graduates. And so I think that's a huge testament to kind of what you're talking about, Skylar. Does anyone else want to jump in?
I guess I'll kind of like not say too much, but when I got the PhD, I mean, I was very lucky to get a job before I finished. I had to be done within like 6 months, but I was very lucky. So I was kind of just seeing where the waters took me. But I will say that since that time, I would say 3 years now, I've had it for 3 years. I am hopeful to still use it in a way that is that only continues to promote the success of Indigenous people. And I mean that to mean I am very fortunate to have met so many great people. And now as my responsibility to ensure that those people whose stories have been entrusted to me is respected in the spaces where they've been disrespected before. And that's what keeps me going. And when you have a PhD, you get to flex a little bit, you know, you get to, it's still hard for me sometimes because I don't like to celebrate myself. That's another issue. But you get to say to people as they come at you, these people who have a PhD too, maybe they have more things written, but at the end of the day, that those 3 letters, the PhD at the end is the same, and they can't tell you you don't belong there. They might believe it because for whatever reason, but you have the same qualifications as this person did. You had to go through the same process. You had to actually also do probably a lot more, especially if you're a woman or queer or a person of color. You have to have more done. And so you get access to the space to make the change. And that's where my goals lie now, is using this mechanism of just a piece of paper in some cases sometimes to actively make space and change. And that's my goal for using my PhD from now on.
I mean, on a practical level, and again, I think we're at a place, especially coming out of the pandemic, where I think I'm even more open-minded about where I would eventually end up than I was at the beginning. But you know, I thought I would go back. My plan was always to go back into some form of nonprofit work or work for a government agency of some kind, do something that was in the public sphere, or potentially strike out on my own and if I wanted to do some kind of consulting work. But I think the more and more I'm appreciating the kind of interdisciplinary depth of our field, that there are so many different ways that we can all engage and work across disciplinary lines to do heritage conservation work. And I think that's really exciting. And I'm also realizing more and more that we need, just coming from a history background, we need people with humanities training in a lot of different fields that may be complementary to preservation, but may not be. And I think, you know, just at this moment in time, 2021, we need people who have those kinds of critical thinking skills, who can evaluate evidence, who are sort of seeking out the truth about the past. I mean, it's really important. So I think having those skills and being open to being placed in a number of different environments outside of academia, I think it's a really urgent need that we have at this time.
So I was just waiting to go last because my first goal is to finish my PhD. That is number one. And after that, I think, like Skylar, I'd like to teach in some sort of capacity, whether it's small college, maybe university. I do love working with like high schoolers or younger. I think that can also be really interesting and fulfilling. So I'm really open. I do have sort of like a dream project that's sort of rolling around in my head, and that would be to do like an oral history project in my hometown to just collect the stories of all the people that have been there, because I think that would be really fascinating, and that, you know, there's sort of not a lot of that floating around right now. So that's what I'm hoping for.
And really quickly, Anna, let me just add, because I think the two-parter to that, oh man, I'm losing my train of thought, but was you don't be worried about not maybe getting that teaching position, or maybe, I think what's one of the most beautiful things about our field is that we are able to see things in a very in-depth way that others can't. You know, we're able to read how monuments affect the way people are interacting with city and history, and we're able to have such an expansive mindset and really bring in different ways of thinking into different spaces. And as long as you feel like you can actively contribute that to some place, you'll be able to make space for yourself. I think for me, it's important to use what we said about like networking and having good advisors to motivate you to use that to kind of help create your own field, your own way of doing this work. Because the more we are showing our how much preservation is needed, the more that I think we're going to be making our own careers and making space for ourselves and others coming from us. It's interesting. I think historians, I know us, we get, you know, very down on the facts, but the more we're able to actually articulate how the real world is being and how we're all interacting with it, I think that we'll be able to make space for ourselves. So yeah, don't worry about just not getting that tenure track, or being worried about that you may have, you may not be able to do all that you want. I can attest to, like, if you have a good heart and if you do the networking and if you do this work well, that you'll be able to maneuver yourself into different facets where you probably never thought you would end up.
Yeah, thanks for that, Miranda. Anyone else want to jump in? No, we're good. Okay. So yeah, I thought that both what Kai said and Miranda said just now tied into some of the questions that we were getting, and I'd love to bring in answers to whatever questions that folks have out there. So I'm just going to kind of start chipping away at those. But yeah, so Andrew Hart asked, how do you hope or / encourage more students to approach, engage in, join, and push preservation? Undergrads moving to grads, students pushing programs, young professionals pushing partners. So I think we've kind of started talking about kind of like providing those opportunities and bringing in people to kind of promote change and be kind of the next generation of people kind of pushing against the boundaries and standards of what preservation and history look like. But anyone else kind of want to expand on that? Or I guess also, like, maybe this is me putting too much of a spin on the question, but like, what has to change in order for preservation as a field practice or as an academic discipline in order to encourage more people to kind of make it more inclusive and welcoming to folks coming from different places and backgrounds and viewpoints?
I think we need to demystify what preservation and all of these things. I think when people hear preservation, they think of something very specific, like we're going to preserve this old home, which we are, you know, like it's a part of it. But like, what are we, how are we doing that work on in a bigger scale? I think kind of moving away from what society thinks of historians and all of us, and saying, no, this is actually the work that we're doing. And I think that we've had the biggest moment. Look at all the monuments coming down. I know in Chicago, where I'm at right now, all of that impacted the way that we were talking about the history in the city. And so we need to be able to add and provide that kind of access, and also just demystify what these words mean. And I think that ends up on us, because the schools are going to keep using these terms, but how do we make sure that we kind of help change the narrative?
And I think the methods in which that information that we're trying to get to the public has to evolve with the times, because we are in a very, electronic, the media, the social media and everything is really, really big. And so the way in which we share the information is, and have people connect with the information that we're putting out there, and bringing to light and recovering. A lot of this stuff has been, hidden for decades and even longer. But really, I would say that the methods, and whether that be more documentaries and more social media campaigns to, that has really worked with the work that I've done in Oklahoma, and also with the Texas Freedom Colonies Project. We have a lot of public facing initiatives and engagement projects going on, and that's a big thing, because if it's too complicated, if it's too high level, if you say, then people aren't going to respond, and they're just going to pass right over it. And it could really, really be something that could affect and be a pivotal piece to what they're doing and their journey going on, and getting them involved in preservation. So.
And I'd say I've been really encouraged by some of the experiences I've had as a TA, teaching small sections in general education history classes to non-majors who are taking this one history class and that's it. And to be able to incorporate, place-based history into that classroom space, it's a really great way of engaging students who have no intention of ever picking up a history book ever again, because you're teaching them how to read the past through the landscape. And that's something that they are going to take with them. You're teaching them how to connect with places that matter to them, that they may not have, as we've said, have the vocabulary to really describe. So I think there's real opportunity just in undergraduate education and high school and middle school education as well, to just start talking about the past through the language of place, and to begin to kind of cultivate that sensibility among younger people, because I think it's interesting for them. It's much more relatable, I think, to them as well.
I guess the one thing I'd add is sort of in this idea of demystifying is also demystifying like the archival process, or like what things matter enough to be put into an archive outside of monuments and place. I think sort of in my own outreach, that's what I try to emphasize, is that, you're whatever it is you have that does matter to somebody somewhere.
Right, and kind of letting people know that their own histories matter too, so then they can work on that as well. Yeah, for sure. Cool. Unless someone wants to jump back in, I'll move on to another question. And I think this is from an anonymous attendee, but for anyone who spent time outside of academia and returned to a PhD, and I think Laura, you qualify as that. What was the transition like? Have the skills and experiences you established in your time outside of academia been useful or maybe challenging now that you're back in school? And I think that is kind of an important question also, and I can like broaden that to also think about, I think there are concerns about following a non-traditional path, or just kind of feeling like you're not prepared enough, or you're switching disciplines. There are kind of a wide variety of obstacles that you can kind of think of in terms of, imposing a barrier to make that plunge and say, I'm going to go do this. So Laura, you can speak to that, or anyone else can jump in terms of, concerns they had about continuing on to a PhD.
Yeah, so I mean, it was a really difficult transition at first. I think because, especially at least at how my program was structured, my first 2 years were dedicated to coursework, and I worked more hours during that stage of my degree than any other stage so far. I think I've been able, since I've been past my qualifying exams and working on dissertation, I've been able to treat that more like a job. So, I'm able to set up better boundaries around that. So I think that's managing the dissertation I've really been able to lean on my project management skills or my time management skills from my job. But it was a very, stark difference between going to a job for a set number of hours and having, my weekends, to then going and doing coursework where I had, 1,000 pages of reading I had to do, and it, learning and feeling like I had to read all of it because, you can't, the skills that you need to get through grad school, especially that phase, very different than the skills you need to get through a job where you really do have to be precise and you really do have to be detail oriented. So learning how to read, just the reading skills between the two, it took me a long time to master that. But I do think, I'm glad that my trajectory worked out well for me. I'm glad that I took the time that I did, because I think on some level I was more focused once I figured out what my new workflow was going to be. But it's tough, and I think, in my experience, I was slightly older than a lot of my peers, so it took me a little bit longer to sort of make those social connections, just because I was at a different place in my life. But I would echo that all of it's come around full circle again now that I'm at the dissertation phase. And it's much easier to think about it as a discrete job as opposed to this all-consuming thing that I have to finish, by a certain deadline. So.
I have one small thing to add. So I worked for 2 years before going into academia, which is not a lot of time, I guess, in the grand scheme of things, but there's sort of one specific skill that I developed, and that's learning cold outreach or networking. And as advice, or as like a very specific action item, I learned that making templates of your emails to send to people with an introduction, a clearly stated introduction as to who you are and why it matters that you're reaching out to this person. That's actually helped me a lot in academia, reaching out to potential mentors or advisors, even just other people that I wanted to speak with. So having those interpersonal skills developed in the workforce has helped me a lot networking in academia.
Anyone else want to jump in?
I can't really chime into any work experience because I pretty much went straight through. I took a year off between my graduating from my undergrad semester off from my undergrad, and then a year off between my master's and starting my PhD program to do the application. I didn't want to rush that application phase. So I think just any advice as far as if that is the route that you think you want to go to, take time to really filter out your programs that you're applying for. You don't have to rush and try to do that. So yeah, I would just encourage people to take time and really study and figure out what you want out of your program, and then have that as you're going through that process, so that you talk with the professors and everyone who you're interviewing with during that process, and let them know what your needs will be. And then, I think you'll be in a better situation, a better position as you're starting. You'll feel better. You'll feel heard. So, yeah.
And I would also kind of add, I think, in terms of both what I think it ties to what everyone else has been saying, but I also worked for 2 years before going back to do a PhD, and I think one thing that part of my life made me realize a lot was the importance of kind of communication. And it's kind of speaking to the interpersonal stuff that other folks have touched on, but just even things like acknowledging that you received an important email, or saying that, like, I'll get to this later, here's like my expected timeline, like just things like that make a huge difference. And those are not necessarily the skills that you learn going through college, right? So, so I felt like I benefited in some ways from just taking that time away, get some perspective, but at the same time, yeah, it has also not been an easy transition either. So it kind of cuts both ways. But yeah, anyone else want to jump back in, or we're good? Okay, I think one thing I saw in the chat was, Miranda, you talked about universities and departments seeing PhD candidates as an investment and how that can lead to pressure towards graduation. Can the panelists talk more about this and how it may intersect with coping with life goals or difficulties both during and post PhD? Anyone want to kind of pick up on that? I know that might kind of get to very personal areas, so we don't really need to go there if we don't want to, but anyone want to respond?
Yeah, I think that, again, I was very lucky to have an advisor who was, he was very lucky because he had paved like the way he was approached and how he approached things in the department, because he's seniority and all of these other things. So he was able to get away with a lot more than I think that others could. So him having my back and not saying, he's saying like, as long as you're good with me, don't worry about the department. And that is not the case for everybody. I have seen though how it has affected everybody or other people with this idea that the school is seeing you as like an entity, like a product, not as a human. Like you have, because academia holds us all up to like some, prestigious level, and it makes us all feel that way, like we're holier than thou, which is another issue. But when that happens, they are like, you need to prove your worth. And to me, my worth has always been, am I being worthy enough for my community? Am I being worthy enough for myself? It's always been much more worthiness on a more direct level, because I don't owe these institutions anything. They owe me, in my opinion. And so they should be much more accommodating to this idea. And I think the pandemic, hopefully, the double-edged sword that it is, has tried to make people see and I say that lightly, not with taking any consideration, like so many people being killed during this time, is just like, we learned how to navigate ourselves online and things like that to have more compassion for people. But I'm starting to see it kind of slip away as, we're moving away from the hard-hitting testament that we went through. But for me, it was, I'm the one who has this knowledge. I'm the one who could be doing this for you. I should be worthy enough to be invested in your department. Yeah, I don't need to prove my worth to you. You need to prove your worth to me. And I think that is something that should be taken in consideration when you are applying, as well as considering any offers. Like, are they actually interested in promoting your work? Are they actively invested in providing space for you and your cohort to put on conferences and to say things that maybe others don't? What are they doing to make sure you're successful beyond just yourself? Because if they aren't putting in as much effort into making that transition, then it's kind of ridiculous for them to expect that we should be the ones carrying that load. And I'm hoping that is something that changes. But for me, again, I'm a very spiritual person. I do ceremonies, and to me, I was able to always kind of ground myself. But if you have that pressure on you, I think it's important to why are you doing this? And is it worth seeing through? There's no shame in failing. I don't even consider it that. This program is meant to try to break everybody. These programs are meant to really challenge people. And that's not to say one person's better than the other, but I believe firmly in the people I know who left early. They did it and they had so much better quality of life than I did. And they were able to release themselves and see things and do things that, I couldn't, and the happier. And I see that more as a success than anything. As long as this person's living their happiness and their truth, I don't see any problem. The dissertation is just a little book I have, but the work I'm doing actively every day is more important.
And I'll kind of back to what Laura mentioned earlier about her first 2 years being pretty difficult, and just there's a lot that fits in to those first 2 years when you're starting a program. And for me, it was very much a roller coaster, and definitely learned a lot about myself and how to advocate for myself appropriately. knowing my limits and respecting them, myself, because if you don't, burnout will follow very quickly. So really just knowing your limits and being able to, as Miranda was saying, we know that we are very, very talented people. We're intelligent and we have skills and we have things that we can contribute. And they're lucky to have us. They're lucky to have our minds, and we're lucky to be there, and we're grateful to be in those positions. But yes, being an advocate for yourself is definitely a major piece to success and finishing and being happy and enjoying the process, so yeah, definitely knowing your limits and advocating.
I'd like to add just sort of one last thing. I don't want to take us over time, but related to graduate students being seen as investments or as units. I think especially when you come into a program that requires TAing or teaching, it becomes especially clear then. And the stress of a graduate program becomes even greater when you have to teach in addition to your normal course load. And so, just keep in mind that those decisions don't, whether or not you receive your funding, you're TAing for the person that you want to TA for, those decisions don't actually reflect your worth, but they are sort of how the department sees you, your work, where you fit in, who they think you fit with. I think that's sort of a very concrete way that we're sort of commodified as graduate students in our department. But yeah, that's definitely just something to keep in mind if you're looking at programs, thinking about going to one versus the other. That TA component is really important.
I know we are half a minute over time now, so I would love to wrap up, but I have really kind of personally benefited a lot from listening to all y'all speak. So thanks for all your input. And if anyone wants to close us off with just kind of one final message to folks listening out there, feel free to chime in. Anything you want to say to the future preservationists and historians?
The only thing that I would say, it doesn't matter where you're from, you can do this. There's so many different people in PhD programs all over, from all different backgrounds, and there's a space for you here in the preservation field if you take the time and just figure out where you fit. But yeah, there's so many opportunities and so many great things to come from all of these beautiful people here on this Zoom in the webinar, bringing to the preservation field. So I can only imagine what the future has for the field of preservation. So you can do it.
I always say to stay humble and to stay with a good heart, and to Indigenous and people of color and queer, we're just keep going, because we're not, a lot of people will try to say that what you're talking about is not relevant, but it is. And so just to keep making space for yourself as much as possible.
And confirmation will come. I just want to drop that in there as well, because I so many moments of just random folks in stores and just all over. The confirmation will come to show you where you should be, or what avenue you should go in. So just listen to yourself. That's all I'm gonna say. I'm not gonna say anything else.
Laura, Kai?
Just, you belong. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. That's all I have to add.
Yeah, everybody said really great things. So I'm just going to second all of that. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, all of you, for taking the time to be with us tonight and to share your thoughtfulness and your expertise. I love Emma's comment. The positivity here is immaculate. We love to see it. Can't say that better. So thank you for being here so much. And to our audience, I hope you continue to attend the live events throughout Dismantle Preservation this week. Tomorrow, we will specifically be looking outside of America. We're going to go beyond Turtle Island and look and see what the rest of our globe is up to. We're going to have a panel discussion that looks passports to the former Yugoslavia. There are a couple of lightning talks on LGBTQ history in the UK. We have concrete building analysis in the UK as well, decolonizing Guam's heritage preservation, examining Germany's difficult history, and then we also have a difficult history in Jamaica lightning talk as well. And I just hope all of you continue learning and engaging along with our panelists and our speakers from the week. I truly mean it when I say that coordinating this event and seeing what all the emerging professionals and emerging grassroots advocates are up to gives me a lot of hope for the future of cultural resources. So I hope that's what everybody walks away with this week. So thank you for being here tonight, and have